that's in the team meeting yesterday.
¿Qué pasa?
What? What are we talking about today, buddy?
¿Qué pasa? Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Estoy bien, ¿y tú?
Muy bien.
¿Dónde está tu gato?
El gato hasta aquí.
Hola, Kobe.
In the same spot as yesterday. You like that?
No, I love it. They're smart. The sun shines through there, right?
You know what? I don't know if I told you this before, but the sun only comes through here like during the morning and like the afternoon, because the fact that we're on the north side.
Okay.
The good thing about this side of the complex that we're currently living in is that we have a view of the mountains, so it pays out. But also, it's going to be good in the summertime because the fact that we don't get a lot of sun, so it won't be as hot, and we're on the second floor. So that would be nice too, because that means we don't have to run our AC all the time. And yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure you still will want to, because like I was talking to like one of our coworkers last year, and she was saying that like people weren't being admitted into grocery stores during like COVID lockdown and stuff like that, because like, you know, like older folk in general, because like they'd be having to wait outside in line, and it'd be like 109, 111 degrees. So their bodies would essentially, like, their body temperature would start to climb because they're hot as all get out, and they're like standing in the sun waiting to go in the grocery store. And then you know, somebody would be like testing their temperature with the infrared gun to their head,
and it'd be 150.
It'd be 150. No, it'd pop off above like 101.4 or whatever they're looking for. So they're like, sorry, like go back in your car, like go into the AC, and hopefully they would at least let them come to the front of the line. But our coworker was telling me this, and she was like, people were like getting popped left and right. It's really funny that I'm saying like popped and like infrared gun and stuff like that.
Like, you know, when someone gets popped off, I think that means they like got shot, right?
I know, yeah, they died.
You know what? I've been actually listening to a lot of Crime Junkie podcasts, and I've been getting really in tune. Besides, like, because when I want to give fitness a break, I'm like always I either listen to Joe Rogan or like Crime Junkies. And like I've been like smothering myself with like murders and missing people.
Nice.
Where I have like vivid dreams about like the situations, and I'm like, maybe I should get away back. I should maybe listen to more fitness podcasts again.
The human
getting
mind
popped
can get
and people
sick.
getting popped off.
Getting popped off with infrared temperature scanners.
That reminds me of the 21 Jump Street, or what is it called?
Yeah.
And he goes, "It's time to pop off," or like, "Pop off, mother." Two things, Roman, before we start the podcast, because you're going to be talking first. But two things. If before you start listening to this podcast or watching it, put in the comments below or above or on the side, left and right, wherever your comment box is. You know, you never know. What if it's somewhere else besides below? Do you like your partner thin, moderate, or thick? And we're not boasting our opinions. We're not gonna say anything. We're not discriminating against. We are just curious of what your preference is. That's it. You don't need to explain anything further. So if you just make sure after you like the video on YouTube, or give it a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, whatever the case may be, make sure it's 0 out of 5 stars first off, and then do a comment. Just say thick, thin, moderate. And you know what? Some people might not understand the rating. Some people will, but maybe they have to tune in more to figure it out. And second off, update, Roman and I were just talking about before this podcast started is, did y'all hear about the Juji Mufu and Tom lawsuit? If you haven't, go check it out. It's pretty interesting. If you have been in the fitness realm or fitness world and you you pay attention somewhat to I mean, everyone knows Juji Mufu. If you don't know Juji Mufu, you type in that name, I bet you've seen a video. He's famous for like doing the overhead press with like 225 and doing the splits with 2 chairs. He's deadlifted with fire. He's like pretty much a stunt man, but he's jacked as hell. But he's not really a stunt man. He just likes to do oddball lifts, I guess you would say, on top of the typical training, he does. He usually does like, I guess, powerlifting / strongman stuff. Would you say, Roman?
Yeah, I think he's done bodybuilding too.
He did arm wrestling for a minute too.
Yeah. Arm wrestling had a craze, I think, because like the Shrug Collective, they did a podcast of like Devin Larratt, and that guy's pretty popular. So he kind of helped blow that up a few years back. But it seemed to have faded. Like I'll see it every once in a while, kind of like come up, and it's something that like I search decently frequently, just because I'm interested in the sport, if you will.
Is someone getting murdered outside your apartment?
People are always getting murdered outside of my apartment.
You know what? It reminds me of if you guys listen to Iron Culture, Eric Helms, or I don't know if it's Eric Helms or Omar Isuf. One of them, like literally, there's like sirens every episode, but like in their audio.
Really?
Yeah,
I haven't listened to the Iron Culture podcast in a long time, actually. I've just kind of dropped off. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be Omar Isuf, but you know what? I feel like it is Eric Helms because I feel like he's so smart, but he's not really the tech guy, and Omar Isuf is. So like he never probably hits mute. Like he probably always stays on. I bet Omar Isuf knows. Like even me, like when I'm yawning or like if I like have to burp, like I'm always muting my Skype. So like I don't try to, like when you're talking, I don't want to like interrupt your talking. So like or if I have to like cough or like sneeze, like I just hit mute. So like I always wonder if like I think I have a assumption that it's Eric Helms. But anyways, guys, episode 72. What it do? That reminds me of Portillo's, like, order 72, what it do? Order 72, what it do?
I don't know that.
They like every time there's an order number, they say like, like order 55, your hamburgers, it's your hamburgers and fries, or I don't know, like they like rhyme like
really?
Yeah, so like I don't know if it's like, I think they might have like a set thing that they say like episode 1. I don't know.
Have some fun.
Episode 1 or order 1. Have some fun. But they just like rhyme it with like the last number that's like called on the order. But anyways, episode 72, guys. We've got another good one here for you today. We're going to be talking about some form ideas, some form stipulations. Also, Roman and I are probably going to just talk about like 2 totally different things, but not totally different things, but like some areas that we see. Since we have 2 people on here, I want to make sure we have like a separate opinion on some things and not always like talk about the same thing. So Roman, what it do, buddy boo? I want you to go. Hey, start us off, buddy. What do you want to talk about today with today's topic?
Sweet. Episode 72. That's kind of crazy. I listened to my breakfast, and I was like, I think we're on episode 1 billion. So that's like the start of my notes. But pretty much like the premise of the podcast today is I've heard a lot of people say in the past, like the right way to squat, the right way to bench, the right way to deadlift, or the wrong way to squat, the wrong way to bench, the wrong way to whatever it might be, the wrong way to row, the wrong way to curl. There's a lot of that out there.
You know what? When you say stuff like that, it reminds me of those. I love them, but I also hate them. Those stupid videos where it's like one with the X and one with the check mark. I'm like, come on. Like, who's there to? It's like you're God and you stamped like the be all, he all. Like, I don't even know if I'm saying that right.
So like my goal with this podcast is to kind of dispel that there's like one correct way to lift, and I'll give a almost innumerable number of reasons why, not innumerable, but a lot of different reasons why that's incorrect, and that there's different forms for every type of lift based off of various characteristics individualized to the person in question that's lifting. But yeah, I mean, I think it's in our nature to that's why they call it clickbait, but it's in our nature to search for things like the best song, the best exercise for, the best food for dieting, for bulking, whatever it is. And it's like, it's so contextual that like there is no best. And like when somebody says best, it's like, this might be the best for me, or this might be like my personal opinion, but it's not a universal best. It's like a singular or a general, not specific best. So I specifically, because this could be like a 1,000,000-hour podcast, wanted to go over squat form and some different things that I would look for in squat form, why it could be different from individual to individual. I want to go over bench with you all, deadlift with you all, some upper body movements generally speaking, and then some things to look out for which are like potentially dangerous and where you like might want to say something. But for the most part, like what I'm going to get at is that it's not always appropriate to like walk up to somebody and say like, hey, your form is like whack, or like, oh, I noticed like you're lifting this like in a way that could be like harmful to yourself. That actually might be an incorrect statement, and that kind of statement could potentially be harmful to the individual because they could believe that they are like harming themselves, and it might actually not be the case. So there is something called like fitness phobia. People are afraid of like exercise. People will see something like Larry Wheel's friend who was incline pressing the other day, going for a max effort, and he tore his pec right off of the humerus. Like that is very unfortunate. That kind of thing can happen. It does not happen in most situations, I'd say, for like most people, just because that was a very unique situation. That person was going for like an absolute like max out test. I guess would be weight. It was weight that they like had never touched before. They're an entertainer on YouTube, so they're doing something like very extreme to get views, and unfortunately it like went very, very wrong. Usually that's not the case. So I'd say if you are going for like a max effort attempt, it's okay to like do like 1 RM testing, 1 rep max testing. I wouldn't say that it should not be a significant jump. Is probably like greater than 10% of something you've done before. To expect that your gains have been like above that, unless you haven't done like a 1 rep max test in like years, and you've been doing like 300 by 10 to 12, and your previous like 1 rep max was like 315 on squat, and you go for like 345, like that's a totally like doable jump. But if you've been squatting 300, I would do something like 335, 345, maybe 365, for example, for conservative like 1 rep max. Like most likely you can probably do like 400, 405, but you like slowly work up to that is what I'm trying to say. So that was a little bit of a divergence, but so today we will go over how to assess your form, change it if necessary, and evaluate others' form and seek to understand their individual movement patterns. So that's the goal for today. So we'll start in on squats. So number of different things that I want to bring to your attention. So depending on the structure of your hips, in particular for squats, you can test the amount of ab or adduction to determine squat stance, and I'll do my best to explain that to you. Juggernaut Training has a really good video on this as well. If you want to see it on YouTube, you can probably type in Juggernaut Training, how to determine my squat stance.
Which
the greater, yeah, it's really neat. I'll see if I can dig it up and send it to you. If I don't send it to you tomorrow morning, just remind me. I'll send it to you. It's really, really neat. It's something that Sam can do it to you. Actually, I'll use Sam as an example, or I'll use you as an example and I'll say like what Sam would do to you to demonstrate like how you can test this.
Yeah, and I only say that, guys, because like I've been kind of having some troubles when it comes to like squatting and like not feeling correctly. So that's like some of the issues I've been running into, and that's probably also why I never post like squat videos.
Yeah, that Disturbed song has been like stuck in my head all day. It's like, and dealing with these changes, violently these changes. So that's what we're gonna do in your squat, buddy.
I love it. I love it.
So the greater abduction, which just means movement away from the midline. The midline is cut a line straight down through your nose. Movement away from the midline is abduction, moving away from the midline. Okay. The more outward your stance will likely be for optimal, will be optimal for you. So let me repeat that. The greater abduction you have, the more outward your stance will likely be optimal for you. If you have roughly equal abduction, adduction, you might be able to play with your stance a little bit. More likely you're going to have a nice, mostly foot forward stance if you have like fairly equal abduction and adduction, just because that's when the head of your femur is going to be into the ball of your hip joint the most. For some people that might cause some discomfort. So generally speaking, generally the recommended form to start, this would be for beginners, is about shoulder width or hip width, depending male, female. Males, I'd say, are okay to go with shoulder width. Females, I'd say, go with hip width, pointing somewhat out. So at about probably 10 and 2 is probably the best way to visualize it with your feet. Some people might be able to get away with 11 and 1. I'd recommend probably more 10 and 2. That allows a little bit more room to kind of maneuver in the hips. But remember, it depends person to person. So here's the test. You lie on your back. You lift your feet up into the air so that your feet are creating a 90-degree angle. So lying on your back, feet are up in the air, creating a 90-degree angle. And you're going to have your partner test the amount of abduction of the knee. So or the hip rather. So they're going to grab the lower part of your leg around the calf muscle, and they're going to slowly, and the person that's having their leg moved is going to give them feedback like, okay, that's enough. But you can also feel it. You don't want to wrench on it. You want to be nice and gentle, but you're going to abduct the lower part of the leg away from the midline and keep pulling until it stops and it won't go anymore. And depending on the degree of abduction, that'll give you an idea of how much you can widen your feet out. If you have a great degree of abduction, that means, let's say your level of abduction is 90 degrees. So foot is generally right here, and the degree of abduction comes all the way over to here. That's an immense amount of abduction. That means in your stance, you can really point the toes really, really, really far wide. And I would go like very highly exaggerated in that sense. So if we're looking at a clock, for example, if you had about 90 degrees of abduction, that was comfortable for you, mind you, then you could try doing some light squats. Always start with body weight first and then progress up with weight of about, let's say, 9:30, so about in between 9 and 10, and the clock between the clock arm, minute clock arm between 2 and 3. So not quite like your feet like pigeon-toed. Most people, I do not think that would ever be a very effective foot stance, but your foot stance could potentially be quite wide. Okay. So that determines hip width. You can also test the degrees of adduction. So that would be moving the hip towards the midline. And if you have a great degree of adduction, that means you can point the feet quite straight and still get nice and deep into the hip socket. So that's also something to test with. I would say most people have trouble with squatting with their feet straight ahead. So most people are going to have their toes pointed out somewhat. It just depends on the degree to which you do have to experiment around with this. It's not a perfect test by any means, but it will be indicative of the degrees of abduction and adduction, just indicating the degree, the literal degree to which the hip can move in the femur socket.
Should we bring a protractor to the gym?
I would bring a protractor. Make sure you also bring graph paper. No, you don't have to bring a protractor. It's also actually a pretty good warm up for your glute muscles.
That's why I wish. That's why when I get my home gym, I'm gonna try to like even out. I'm gonna try measuring it, but like I wish gyms like to racks wish they would put like either like a piece of tape or like something to like give like a perpendicular like angle. So like if you were to like test out your degrees of like, you know, where to point your feet at least like you can have like a good idea, because you'd be able to see the spaces between, you know, from the toe to that piece of tape or, you know, line, whatever it is that's on the floor.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I feel like over time, as you progress from like beginner to intermediate, though, it kind of just sticks in your mind. So it might be like a little awkward at first. It shouldn't be painful, but it might be a little awkward at first. But after some time, maybe like 3 to 5, upwards of 10 squat sessions, you would have it, and you would know like approximately what would be like the optimal foot stance angle that you want. That doesn't have anything to say with width, by the way. Width, you do have to experiment a little bit, but generally speaking, if you want to target the quads, it's going to be a little closer. And then generally speaking, if you want to target the more of the posterior chain with squats, like the erectors, you're going to probably be further, like wider, and you're going to sit like much like more forward with your back angle. If you want to focus more on just glutes, then your feet are going to be on the wider side, and you're going to want to sit really deep into the hip, not so much into the knees. That's my best like shorthand of explaining what style squat you might have. So I wanted to go over some different individualistic characteristics that somebody might have, and then kind of describe a couple of like different forms you might see. So individuals will have different limb lengths. So we know that we see people that are 4 feet tall and 7 feet tall, different joint structures. So some people might have a deeper hip socket, which will allow a little bit more play of the head of the femur. Some will have very narrow hip sockets, so not as much play for the femur. The ratios of upper to lower bodies will be different, which will dictate the back angles. It could dictate whether a wedge is needed, that kind of thing. People have different plasticities of muscles, so people you'll find like people just have different levels of like flexibility, meaning they can get into different positions. You can absolutely work on that. I think we've talked about that in a flexibility podcast. If not, let us know and we will do one for you folks. But some people might have to work on being able to really drive their knees forward more than others. So you might have to foam roll your calves. You might have to do some calf stretches. You might have to do some activation drills before a squat session where you're focusing like on unilateral lunge where you're really driving the knee forward. You might need to like foam other parts, do drills where you do like some calf raises to like get the calves firing. Not too many, because it could cause them to be like slightly tight during the session. Experience is going to be like huge, as I mentioned. As a lifter advances from beginner to intermediate to advanced, the little things that a beginner might think about are just ingrained into to your proprioceptive like memory. So you just know where to put your feet. You just know how you like to start a squat movement. Age also kind of dictates into the experience, but also you might have certain qualms about doing a certain movement if you're on like the older side, for example, just for injury risk mitigation. So somebody might be squatting to a box, and that might be sufficient for them. It doesn't necessarily mean that's wrong. It might be that is the most appropriate lower body movement for them at the time. Sex is going to change things. On average, males have more narrow hip structures than females. Females are going to have wider hip structures, which will allow them to essentially maneuver their levels of abduction, adduction slightly different. It is variable from person to person, but sex can play a role, etc. So those are just a few that we came up with off the top of my head. So it's important that like respecting each of the above individual characteristics I mentioned or prior form might be different from your own. So the question comes, is there a right versus wrong way to squat or move? There's like more or less optimal or less optimal ways. I wouldn't say right or wrong. So looking at something like a form fault, that can totally happen. One of them is like breaking a relative degree of neutral spine. That might decrease the efficiency of the movement. Let's see here. Any type of like breaking of a standardized movement pattern from rep to rep. So if one person is like, hitting depth of like 90 degrees on the squat, and then they like barely go down, come back up, and then they do like, a half squat, and then they do another quarter squat, and then a half squat, and then like a full rep. It should be relatively standardized. If you don't feel totally comfortable going like full range of motion where you're digging like really deep down into the squat, like that's fine. You might still be working on those, let's say flexibility issues. That's totally fine. Just try to find a place where you can standardize it from rep to rep to know when you're progressing, etc.